Welcome to the third dimension. The humanitarian situation in war-torn Yemen is in danger of being forgotten by the world after a United Nations funds drive managed to raise only $1.2 billion, well short of its target of $4.3 billion, non-governmental organizations say. Reaching funding targets has always been challenging, but the difference now is that the Ukraine-Russia conflict has driven up fuel and food prices. Relief efforts have also been diverted to the recent twin earthquakes in Turkey and Syria, thus putting about 20 million Yemenis at the risk in 2023. To elaborate more on the humanitarian crisis and role that the international organizations play in easing the suffering of war-affected Yemenis, join me from Aden, Anjela Wales. Anjela is the Media and Communication Officer for the International Organization for Migration in Yemen. Welcome to the third dimension, Anjela.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. If we may begin, Anjela, our conversation by asking, there are a number of what we call international aid agencies working on the ground in Yemen. And one of these agencies is your organization, which is the International Organization for Migration. Would you at the start tell me and my audience, what does your organization do specifically to help war-affected Yemenis?
Yeah, sure, of course. So yeah, I'm here in Aden with the International Organization for Migration, and we're an international relief organization that has been operating in Yemen for almost 30 years. And our main focus and populations that we try to serve are people on the move. So that includes people displaced by conflict, people who've been moving because of climate change. It includes migrants that pass through countries that are in need of humanitarian assistance. And so this is the main population group that we're also seeking to serve here in Yemen. We're one of the UN agencies with the largest presence on the ground. We have significant operations in Mocha, in Marib, in Aden, and in Sana'a, in areas around Sana'a, and as well as in Laj. So we reach populations in many areas where there might not be a lot of other presence from humanitarian operations, and where there's large amounts of displacement, high amounts of people in very desperate need. Last year alone, we helped over 3 million people, and this year we're aiming to help more than 4.5 million people with their basic water, safe shelters, more durable camps, with healthcare, with protection needs, and as you mentioned, our appeal, we're asking donor countries at the high-level pledging conference, but also through our ongoing advocacy with donor countries for around $189 million this year, so that we can reach the people who are in the most dire needs, 8 years on and into this crisis.
Okay. Now, Anjela, you mentioned in your intro remarks that you've got offices in Sana'a, Aden, Marib, and Mocha also, and Taiz, yes?
Yes, in Mocha. Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Now, my question is, working in these areas, how would you perceive the most urgent humanitarian needs in those areas?
Yeah, so our programming, it is very versatile. It's very widespread. On the one hand, we're focusing on immediate humanitarian relief. So this is relief that makes sure that somebody who needs urgent health care can come to one of our mobile clinics and maybe have become healed from a wound that they have or an infection, receive a vaccination. That's super crucial. It also means in trucking in water, managing sites, providing shelters, so things that people need in the immediate term to survive to the next day or to the next week. But also importantly, it requires funds to run more durable programming. We call it transition and recovery programming, which means that we can help rehabilitate schools, we can help rehabilitate hospitals, we can reform water networks. And this means that in areas where many maybe have been affected by an influx of people who've been displaced by the conflict. Maybe they don't have the infrastructure or the services to really sustainably keep mass amounts of people, with the proper services that they need. That we can come in and support authorities and support local communities to make sure that these basic services are improved and are sustainable, and that helps not only people who've been displaced, but also the host communities who opened their doors and welcomed so many people in need. So our programming really does try to do both, and it's why this funding that we're calling for is so crucial, so that we can continue to do both at the same time.
Okay, so in terms of needs, again, Angela, basic or urgent humanitarian needs, okay, are there areas in which needs are really or a real priority than other areas, or you just look at them with the same angle?
And the areas in the country where we are working tend to be places where there's high amounts of displacement or high amounts of migrants. So we're looking at places where people are in need because of their mobility and because of the fact that, if you're displaced in Yemen, you've probably been displaced before. Of the 60,000 people who were displaced last year alone, many of them, it was for the fourth time or it was for the fifth time. So these are families who already lost everything and then lost everything again and then again. And so us being able to operate in areas, the areas that we choose are often in locations where people are very mobile and where people are starting over. So that's how IOM is the International Organization for Migration works, and of course other UN agencies are going to places where there might be more food insecurity or more health needs depending on their priorities. But our focus right now is on people who've been affected by displacement and migrants who are coming from the Horn of Africa, who are some of the most vulnerable people in the country.
Okay. Now, perhaps also you talked about the donors conference, etc. And every now and then, Angela, we hear about the United Nations calling for a donor conference on Yemen, etc. Now, some observers, Angela, they say that some donors are reluctant to pay money in these donors conferences because they claim some of the money and some of the aid go to the Houthis. And before I get your reaction, Angela, let us bring a UN expert, a UN former expert in Yemen, Fernando Carvajal. Let's listen to what he says and then we can react, okay?
The poor result of the donors conference comes from a self-inflicting wound by the UN, meaning for years, for the last 5 years, 6 years, the UN has done a very poor job at managing their relations with the Houthis. The UN panel of experts, the Security Council panel of experts, have reported nearly every year how the Houthis capture humanitarian aid, how they redistribute humanitarian aid to their clients or to their militia and military forces, and how they end up profiting from point A to point Z from the humanitarian response. So the international community is very concerned that out of every dollar, 40 cents could go to the Houthis. And we see that the largest donors, who have traditionally been Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, did not pledge any money to toward this $4.3 billion precisely because of this concern.
Yes, Angela. What do you make out of this?
I mean, I would say in any conflict in the world where these agencies are operating, there are significant challenges. But we do work with the priority of meeting the most vulnerable people with the most effective ways of managing of the money that we have and the resources that we have. And in areas in the north, we are operational, maybe not as extensively in areas of the south, but we are reaching migrants. We just opened up a migrant response point, and we support health centers that are also supporting migrants. We work in displacement sites, and this money is going to the people who need it. This money is going to straight to migrants, straight to displaced people, and there are very well-established accountability mechanisms that are in place for that funding to be monitored, and also to say that maybe some countries, they did not pledge at the pledging conference per se, but that doesn't mean that funding from those countries will not be going to the humanitarian response. We do receive funding from many donors that maybe didn't show up at the pledging conference, but fund our projects for health, for water, for camp management, for shelter, and so just to say that the pledging conference is one moment in time when people can convene, they can express their concerns about the crisis, and they can make a commitment to continue funding the humanitarian response. But it doesn't mean that other funding from other donors won't come in, and that we won't be able to meet and effectively deliver to all people that we need to do in the year of 2023.
Okay. Now, usually there is a common issue raised by many international aid agencies working in Yemen or in any conflict zone, Angela, which is the issue of accessibility, being or delivering aid to the war-affected people. Within your organization, Angela, okay, have you faced what we call field challenges in terms of mobility of your teams, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, that is something that is a common, happening for any organization that's working in Yemen. But I will say that actually, for us, we've chosen areas where we know that we can operate effectively with the authorities, and where we know that our staff will be safe, where we know that people that we work with will be encouraged to come to us for assistance. So it's for us, it's also about choosing locations that where we can be have an extensive presence, and where we can be efficient and effective. And so we try to mitigate that as much as possible. There are many people in need throughout Yemen where we might not be operating, and that's not always because of access. It's also because of funding. It's very expensive to run these operations in Yemen. So I guess it's a multifaceted response to your question, but just to say that in the areas where we've set up operations, we do our best to keep relationships strong, and to express the importance of our work, and we're very well supported in a lot of the areas where we're working.
Okay, in the same point, Angela, I had an interview with a UN expert also, who said that international aid, there is a problem that international aid does not go to Aden with the same size and quantity that the aid goes to Sana'a and other areas. How do you assess this kind of claim, Angela?
Well, I mean, I can only speak again for the International Organization for Migration.
Yes.
Our programming that is in Sana'a and that is in Aden, because these are major transit points of migrants, it mainly focuses on migrants who are coming from the Horn of Africa, and it is extensive in both locations. We have migrant response points in both locations, where migrants can come to register for assistance. We offer voluntary humanitarian return flights for migrants who wish to go home out of both locations. We support health center clinics in both locations. So for us, our programming, is again based on where people are coming to us for help, and it operates in both places.
Yes, of course, we will talk about African migrants intensively in the next point. And talking about it, Angela, that is the issue of African migrants flooding into Yemen. And we understand that in the past, perhaps they needed a shelter, but during a conflict, most of these African migrants, they just want to go to perhaps other Gulf countries like Saudi Arabia, etc. They want to pass through Yemen to other Gulf countries. Now, in terms of African migrants in particular, what has your organization done in order to help this kind of people?
Yeah, so I mean, it's an immense challenge for us. We saw in 2022 around 73,000 migrants from the Horn of Africa who've come to Yemen. Many are seeking to go onwards to other countries in the Gulf to find work. They're coming without, with maybe a bit too much trust in the smugglers. They believe that the trip will be easy. They are not aware of the extent of the conflict. They also might believe that they are going to be able to work in Yemen, that they'll be able to quickly, move on. And instead, when they get here, many become stranded. They're under the control of dangerous traffickers who are extorting them for money, extorting their families back home for money, often violently. They are trafficking them for their work. They're forcing them to work, to sometimes also sex trafficking is involved. So these are, migrants who come and wind up in very precarious situations that they were not aware and are really surprised to find themselves in. And our role is, first of all, to get them out of those dangerous situations as best that we can. That's why we have these voluntary humanitarian return flights for migrants who wish to go home, who come to us and say, I really would like to go, and we can help them then to get their documents in order with their host countries. Many of them are Ethiopian, so we work closely with the government of Ethiopia to secure their documents. We make sure that their health is in shape, that they're fine to travel, and then we charter flights to help them go home. And for those who cannot or do not want to go home, we are really focused on their most immediate needs. So providing them with shelter, sometimes providing them with healthcare if they need it, trying to get them some cash if they need it. But this is something that we really do need a lot more funding in order to keep up with the rates of people who are arriving. This year alone, the numbers have gone up 20,000 in the first 2 months, and it's also important to keep in mind that a lot of these people are coming from very precarious situations themselves, and they're not to be forgotten and they're not to be abandoned. And so that's one reason why this funding and pledging conference is so important, and why the work that we're doing it can really be life-saving for some people who have no other source of support.
Okay, so in addition to the abuses you mentioned, Anjela, that those African migrants sometimes are subjected to, there are also claims, Anjela, that there are cases in which African migrants are being recruited by warring parties. How valid that claim stands, Anjela?
That's not something that I think we have access to. We're not operating in areas where that close to the front lines where that would happen. We hear rumors of it, but I wouldn't be able to confirm. The trafficking, the abuses that we're more aware of might be in farms, might be in people's homes. It might be what you typically know of as trafficking. And almost always it's not. People are not doing these activities voluntarily. They're really forced to do it, and they're not being compensated properly. So yeah, I wouldn't be able to confirm or deny that. I just don't know.
Okay, now back from those claims to our core issue, Anjela. Now, how can international agencies, and in your case, International Organization for Migration, how can their help shift from what we call emergency aid into what we call sustainable development?
Yeah, sure. It's a good question. So, first of all, even if the conflict were to end officially tomorrow, people would still need their most immediate needs met. A lot of people are not quite, displaced people, communities, they're not quite ready to go home yet. They don't feel, we've done intention surveys with them, and they don't yet feel that their areas might be safe enough for them to return. So they're still going to be in situations of protracted displacement, and even people who do decide to stay where they are. They still need to eat, they still need clean water, they still need healthcare. These are the basics for human life. So the immediate response is still very important, but of course also, trying to do more sustainable development projects, as you say, is crucial. Last year, that's why we rehabilitated about 22 schools, hospitals, water networks, which serve around 250,000 people. And this means that, hospitals that maybe never had an emergency room can now take in new patients. It means that schools that only could have one round of classes a day can now have 2 or 3. It's put children into school that never would have been able to go to school otherwise, that have been out of school for years. We just finished an extensive water project in Marib, which will reach around more than 10,000 people in displacement sites and in the host communities. So these are examples of what we would call, yes, sustainable development that will help communities for the years to come. It's not just an immediate relief, but we hope that it will continue to bring life and to bring dignity to many people, and is something that is also quite expensive and requires, again, more donor money and more contributions so we can do more of it.
Okay. Now, a final point, Angela. Usually UN officials, they frequently repeat this, that the only way to end the humanitarian crisis in Yemen or in any conflict zone area is by ending war. So in this regard, Angela, and working from Yemen, etc., have you got a message to say to the warring parties?
I mean, we as IOM, we would of course, support the UN brokered truce that had happened last year, and we saw a lot of hope through that, and we still see hope and hope that it will lead to some more sustainable peace in the country. During the truce, displacement fell significantly by 76%. Civilian casualties fell. So the gains of the truce, are still something that we are really happy about, and we hope will continue in a positive way. I mean, of course, we do hope that peace is restored in Yemen, but like I said before, even if the conflict ends tomorrow, people's most urgent needs will still be there. So just to remind the world that the humanitarian crisis is something that still requires significant investment, and that we not turn our backs on communities who need it.
Okay. So with that remark, we come to the end of this interview, Angela. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise, and perhaps we can see you next time on Yemen Today TV, talking to Yemenis through a Yemeni media.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's all for this time. See you next week with a new edition of The Third Dimension.